Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're tuning into this episode. We are a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we really appreciate you listening, watching on YouTube. We really encourage you to subscribe to whatever platform you're using. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, or if you're on Apple or however you listen to a podcast, be sure and subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. Also, make comments if you like it and share it if you like it. We really need people to make comments and share the episodes that you like. And then also, if you're not already a supporter, we really would encourage you to go to spiritualityadventures.com and you can pick a tier, and we have bonus content for every type of giver. This is a nonprofit, so they're tax-deductible donations, but we do provide bonus content for those who are supporters. So be a part of the team, help support Spirituality Adventures, and we're so glad you're tuning into this episode. All right, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. Thanks for tuning into this episode. Man, I am so excited to have you meet Tripp Fuller. Tripp is a person that I just have met in person only a couple of times. I went to Theology Beer Camp last year in Springfield, Missouri. And then I was just in Denver. I had a chapter in the book, Preaching the Uncontrolling Love of God. And so we bumped into each other there. But I've been listening to his podcast, Homebrewed Christianity, for 2 years solid. I mean, it's been my go-to podcast. And I would say, Tripp, you have helped me hang on to God and in the midst of a dark, dark season of my life. So I am very grateful for you. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. And if people are listening and not members of your supporter group, they need to, because I just gave all the correct answers to a survey.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
Yeah, it's a great bonus
question. If you want to know the secrets to the meaning of life and everything, it's all
exactly.
It's all right
there. Yeah. Frank Schaefer, when I interviewed him, he told everybody, he said, hey, you guys need to just listen to the bonus stuff. Don't listen to this other crap, So anyway, fun stuff. But no, let's start with your story, because a lot of the people listening won't know you. So, give us your origin story, where you grew up, kind of your preacher kid story. And then I want to get a little history of Homebrewed Christianity to just give people a feel for how Homebrewed has, the history of Homebrewed. These are like short things, because then I want to dive into the newest book that you did with Tom Oord, because we've had Tom Oord on here 3 times, and God After Deconstruction. I want to talk about this stuff. So let's start with you. Where did you grow up? Your home?
Family
environment?
Yeah, most of my time growing up was in North Carolina. I was a Baptist preacher's kid, and basically until 5th grade, I was in rural North Carolina, which is its own, where most of your neighbors are tobacco fields. And then in 5th grade, we moved into Raleigh, the capital of the state, the church plant. And from middle school and high school on, I was at an art magnet school doing theater and such. And that was such a radically different space. My church experience was rather positive. I mean, you only get to go to churches your parents work at. If you're a preacher's kid, which it can either be a curse or a blessing, depending. So we were the first church in town, that had like a band playing worship, and ran on small groups and met in a movie theater and all that kind of stuff that happened in the 90s and things. So, and also it was a more progressive Baptist type thing. So it wasn't fundamentalist and that kind of thing. They were edgy, for having women leaders and ordaining them. And so a lot of the, I didn't realize how different my experience was till I got to undergrad at a Baptist school and realized that I didn't recognize
a hat on, right?
Well, I went to Wake Forest for graduate school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Where did you go for undergraduate?
Campbell University, which is in it's kind of between Raleigh and Fayetteville. And so it was there. Like, I remember calling my dad and was like, I was in my first religion class. All these people in there act like women can't be ministers. I was like, what in the world is this? And he's like, yep, not all Baptists are like us, And And there were other awakenings throughout college. I was like, well, why are all the Christians really into military solutions to global problems? Like, these kind of things. Um, so yeah, the growing up, my experience in the church and such was positive enough. I didn't end up with the kind of baggage a lot of people, had in that same time period going through. Not that it was like perfect or anything, but like if the church is a space that encourages intellectual reflection and like encourages you to move beyond boundaries with care, compassion, teaches you questions of systemic justice and advocacy, protest, all those kinds of things that were kind of just part of being a member of, the church you're from, then when when you realize how many of your ecclesial kin have a very different expression, you're like, well, that's weird. I don't, have y'all read the Sermon on the Mount? So yeah, that kind of was there. I went to Wake Forest. That's why I have the hat on, and not just me. Like, there have three other family members that are Wake Forest grads, so we're very much Demon Deacons, which means we inherit a large prejudice towards Duke, specifically around basketball, but also I don't like the Howard-Wassian Mafia either, in church circles. So
I was born in
works
Kansas,
out.
so I'm a big KU guy, but hey, but
Yeah.
Baylor isn't bad either now. So, I almost went to Wake Forest, by the way. I was looking at Furman, Wake Forest, or Baylor when I was 17, 18. Ended up going to Baylor. So anyway.
Well, I mean, no, you can't always make the right decision.
All right. Yeah, I've made plenty of bad decisions, true.
Yeah, but that was before Ken Starr was in charge of the university.
Well, true. Yeah.
I'm not going to just run through Baylor slander, but I have plenty stored up if you need more material.
Hey, when we get dead basketball players showing up in the Brazos River, it's like, so
yeah,
some bad era there. All right. All right. So, how about Homebrewed Christianity? When did you start it?
It started in 2008. March 2008 was when it was a podcast. It kind of came out of pub discussion groups and stuff like that. And I would use rewritable CDs of interviews with authors because no one else read the book. And I hated having theology pub nights where I didn't get to have a beer until halfway through because I had to explain what was in the book no one read. So that was kind of the solution. And then when podcasting kind of kicks off and I find out about it and things, my friend Chad and I, we started in 2008, March 2008. And just, I guess I'm persistent. 1,700 and some episodes later, just still going.
Amazing. You're like the barn swallows outside my house right now who are trying to build nests. And I've been chasing them away for 2 weeks and tearing down their nests. And they just keep at it, man. They just keep at it. I'm like going, I need to be like these dudes. But anyway, so Homebrewed Christianity has grown to be one of the largest theology podcasts in the world. That's not an exaggeration, is it?
No, but I think part of starting that early is early on, we were the only Christian podcast that you could like Jesus, the planet, gay people, and talk about justice without, losing your job. Right. So I think that kind of early entrance thing helps. And, so much of the stuff you kind of get better at over time, just doing it. And for the first half of it, I was in graduate school and then did my PhD and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't like you weren't reading all the time. So it turned into a great way to get free books, talk to the people whose books you were reading that kind of helps you work through things and such. And
see, that's what I'm doing it right now. I'm just reading people and inviting them on my podcast and like, okay, helping me rebuild,
Yeah. So, for the first, I don't know, 3/4 or really until the last 3 years, maybe I was always working full time at a church or a school. And so it also kind of gave you space to try lots of stuff and build the community kind of organically and things before it grew to the point that it could be my primary thing, vocationally. And it's in that time we've tried all sorts of weird things. Some worked and some didn't. But we do lots of online classes that are like, 4 to 6 weeks. And um, like early on, I started doing the podcast live a lot in Los Angeles at different breweries. And then that grew into Theology Beer Camp, which was the first time was in 2016. And then, it's still a thing. And all of it has kind of like grown a little bit, over time. It just kind of keeps growing. And then every so often, when American evangelicalism does enough ridiculous things, a group of people exit, they end up finding the podcast, and there's like a new entry ramp.
Like me.
So it's been fun, and I could not have put this on a, well, what do you want to do in the next 10 years thing? When it started, I don't know. I probably would have named it something different if I thought at 40 I was still going to have the same. This is what comes up when I get Googled.
But I'll tell you, I've had a lot of theology professors. I did a bachelor's at Baylor, master's at Southwestern. I did a doctor of ministry at Fuller. I was working on a PhD at Midwestern in the Hebrew Bible. I've had a lot of theology professors. You single-handedly have got, I've always had a nerdy side to me, but I was pastoring a mega church. So I'd have people at the church who'd never read the Bible, right? Who didn't know anything about it. So you preach to a broad audience who's basically biblically illiterate, right?
Yeah.
And so you do not nerdy, deep theology in the most fun way that I have ever experienced. Like, keep it up. You've got a gift for introducing the deepest of theologies in a way that's fun, engaging, and interesting. And I want to encourage everybody to check it out, Homebrewed Christianity. It's been a lifeline for me. It's helped me reconstruct my faith around OTR process theology, and I'm grateful for it, Tripp. Thank you so much.
Yeah. That kind of goal's kind of always been there. And I think in part, it was always nerdy and stuff because for most of the time I was like doing all the church stuff. So it wasn't like I was doing the talk to larger, like geared towards a larger audience there regularly. And then if you're teaching and you're introducing it in class and stuff. So I learned maybe in the first few years that we would get like more downloads the nerdier the podcast episode was. And the internet's good for like helping you find a niche. And like when you do the niche better, more people resonate with it than trying to be everything to everyone. As opposed to when you're in a congregation, like they're not there just to hear our sermons. And I don't know how many of them actually pay attention every week anyway. It's going to be more like the whole experience of being there, the relationships with all the people and stuff like that. So it's a different task. But in all my time in ministry, I kept seeing more and more people asking questions that to take the question seriously actually requires a level of critical reflection that what I would do if I was preaching or, those kind of things. That wasn't the right format. And I think this has kind of been a feature of the 20th century. Throughout the 20th century, more and more people raised questions or internalized questions from culture that the kind of a priori confessional commitment that especially in a worship space doesn't end up answering all the questions. And so like even the metaphor like home brewing, like the idea is like I like reading all these books anyway. I don't think I would not read them. So I would read them. I take lots of notes and then think to myself, like, what if I wrote this, what would be the most important ideas that I'm wanting to communicate? How are the people I imagine listening? What kind of questions? What would they need to know? That kind of thing. And have a conversation where, because you planned well, hopefully you get the academic, their passion for it to come out. At the same time, you're orchestrating the questions in a way you hope people can follow along and get both like the passion that's there, but also like how these ideas get built and such. So and doing different people a lot, like the metaphor for homebrewing is like, yeah, like you may not like this one, you might like this one, or you might take this from this, because most people's experience of Christianity is that it's, like kind of tasteless, and boring. And I think a lot of people, if you go back to when the podcast started, that was before the homebrewing and craft beer revolution, where people, when they thought of beer, they'd think, oh, you mean Miller, Coors, or Bud, maybe Pabst Blue Ribbon, and if you know beer, you're like, I would not judge that in like the entire flavor profile and complexity that goes into this particular craft by this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people like go like, well, I don't think beer's gross. And you're like, but you haven't even tried real ones. The same thing is similar to Christianity, that when people hear the word, they think, oh, I don't know about that. Like, or what do I have to swallow, stomach, or pretend's good? And so the general idea was like assuming the listener has basic critical reflection and questions, and they need to think about it. Like, what is it like if each episode you're hearing someone and getting to know how they think and wrestle with something, and the task of brewing, like, or critical reflection, and that is something you can't really outsource once you have a big enough question to just a confessional container.
Yeah. Good stuff. So, by the way, folks, last year you had what, 5 million downloads, something like that?
Yeah.
Something like that. I just want people to realize this is check it out. I want to encourage people to go there. I'm going to get into your newest book you did with Tom Ward. Tom's been on here, I think 2 or 3 times, and God After Deconstruction. Everybody knows that I went through 2019 was my darkest year. Felt like an atheist. And if there was a God, I was like, F God. And it was largely because of my own meltdown and my own failures that I hated myself, lots of shame, all that kind of stuff. And then Richard Rohr and people, Brian McLaren and people like yourself started helping me rethink things. Even though I'd been exposed to process as an 18, 19-year-old, I kind of drifted more toward the N.T. Wright kind of theology than the process theology. Now I feel like if there's a God, then I think this is the kind of God I'd want to worship, an uncontrolling love, God of love. And so this book, by the way, folks, is very readable. I'm reading Divine Self-Investment. And that's a deep read, right? But this
Divine Self-Investment is a academic book.
It's an academic book. But this is readable for everybody. And I love the way this was based. Well, you tell folks, you base this on thousands of surveys, right?
Yeah. Basically the surveys were looking at why, what was the main reason to trigger faith transition for people. And so the book is kind of built on the 9 most popular responses that came up in surveys of people, going through faith transition since 2016. And, some of them are kind of, I don't know, perennial questions, right? Like the problem of evil or the relationship to science or history, a relationship to other religions, those kinds of things. And others are more contextual, like the growing awareness of church abuse and systemic patterns of protection, or how the fights over gender and sexual diversity have played out, and that kind of thing. And the goal in the book was to say a lot of the popular texts written to those are either the memoir of one person who kind of goes through some process, and they could end up anywhere, but like it follows. They're more like a memoir of sorts, and others. So many of them tended to be people that were like, "Thank you for telling me your problem. Now I'm going to tell you how to fix it, so that you can still believe the exact same thing that generated the problem." And so what Tom and I wanted to do was take the criticisms, the places where people are deconstructing seriously in a way, and go, well, what is a constructive way of both taking the question seriously and talk about, a largely process relational vision of God in response to them. And so that's kind of what the book is. But in it, there's tons of little quotes and things from a lot of the people in surveys and stuff. So you hear the language or the experiences that set it off. And and yeah, and Tom, who writes for Normal People a lot more often, was aggressive on making sure things. He's like, I think you should say that later.
Readable.
Yeah.
No, it's very readable. I mean, I commend both of you on that. Very, very readable. Give people the big perspective, what I think Bradley Jersak called the Great Deconstruction. What's going on in America right now with this whole age of deconstruction? Like, because I'll have a lot of listeners who are still attending their churches, and, still in maybe evangelical churches, but I'm picking up a lot of new listeners too from the I do mindful meditation stuff, all that. So I got a mixed audience, but what's going on in America with this age of deconstruction, or this great deconstruction?
Yeah, well, I would say that like part of it is it's the result of a lot of changes just in from the Enlightenment on, for our understandings of faith, what the human subject is, its relationship to truth, and all these kinds of things, right? So when the first big ruptures happen around a kind of closed confessional system, it's Protestantism at first, and then it's like, well, what are the authorities? And you have the battles over the Bible, and then the moment you privilege the Bible, then you end up with 40 million denominations, and so then there's like these questions to the authority of the religious superstructure that come from within the faith, and then you realize how hard it is to parse things or to get to like a single certain conclusion. And as a Baptist, it's not hard to imagine, because a lot of times, every time you have a good fight, you end up with 3 churches after it, and
First,
all of them,
third and fourth Baptist,
and they're all biblical, and no, the other one's wrong.
Right. They're all right.
Yeah.
So anyway,
and so that kind of starts. But also, if you look at the beginning of the Reformation, underneath the critique to the ecclesial authority is a critique of the whole political relationship between the church and the state, and it plays out different in different parts of Europe. But even the indulgence critique Luther's raising is like part theological and part it's just economic. It's the transfer of peasant German wealth to Rome, and that. So that's how the German princes end up on Luther's side and such. So as a way to get out under the yoke of the empire that was ecclesially justified. But then as you go through the Enlightenment, there become external criticisms, and like the emergence of science in different ways, historical critical methods of scripture, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of those kind of external critiques, if they're around ideas or challenges like the problem of evil or whatever, those become things in the early Enlightenment that the individual believer, through use of reason and facts and stuff, you would argue for a particular solution. You may or may not accept it, but there was a time where a larger percentage of people thought there's just some obvious conclusions that should be able to be drawn, and maybe we don't have all the info yet, or we haven't used reason collectively. And you can see that getting to a point where an atheist and a theist are arguing, and they both think the other one should get to their conclusion if they just used reason and understood the facts, and this kind of thing. But as you move through time, then there start to be questions that are not just external critiques or internal ones, but they're actually reorienting the self and the self's relationship to truth. So the masters of suspicion is a fun word in the academy, like Marx, Nietzsche, Freud, evolutionary psych, all these kinds of things are ones where you end up internalizing the fact that you aren't transparent to yourself is the reason you hold and believe something, right? Like, so you watch a TV preacher sending anointed rags so that they can get a new private plane, and everyone ends up being a little bit Marxist, right? Like, we're like, I'm going to guess the Holy Ghost isn't what's doing this. And even culturally, right? popular films, even ones that are enjoyed by conservative religious audiences. The anti-hero concept is one where the individual, the hero, is not transparent to themselves, and they have to become transparent to themselves in order to fulfill the narrative. I sometimes joke, right? Like, okay, you grew up a pastor's kid and enjoyed your family upbringing, but you happen to be a nerd and had all these questions. So in order to avoid disappointing your mom, you just get a PhD in philosophy and religion, then go do postdoc in science and religion, and you spend all this energy building your podcast and writing books and things just so that you never have to admit to her that the whole idea of God's stupid. But I don't know that. I'm not transparent to myself. But if I had the right therapist, I might realize it, right? So there's these critiques that happen internally within the church. Then there are external ones that tend to be intellectual challenges. But then it gets to we don't know why we're doing it. And you can see these triggers, right? So why in 2016 was there a dramatic exodus from the church? Well, if you ask them, they'll tell you. They go like, well, we said X and we did Y. And I don't know how the stated values and deepest values of my tradition somehow end up being like Trumpalicious. Mm-hmm. Or you could see it happen with individuals with Black Lives Matter. You watch a video that then puts in front of you the reality your black friends, if you have them, have been telling you for a while. And there's a protest, and the whole group of people like, no. That was a bad apple, right? You could just start going through these things where then this notion, kind of false consciousness, right, that we're not transparent to ourselves. You get this pull, some intellectually that show up in the book, some structurally, like around abuse and stuff, but others like, well, are we sure this good news is good? And why are we so sure if the material consequences for the least of these, those on the underside, those that Jesus had deepest solidarity with all the way to the cross, are that their experience harm and trapped in cycles of injustice don't matter, right? So you could see these different places where that kind of not being transparent to yourself is first learned, I think, by the church not being transparent to itself about what its real motivations are, and so the people are in it are like, well, really? You're going to go harass Bill Clinton, tell me true love waits, and then, right? And then what? Trump, right? So you could, but it goes all the way down to, a regular level. So when you're sitting there and you have these questions, what is the faithful thing to do? If faith has been reduced, which it got shifted in the modern period, not to like I give myself to, or I trust, or orient myself to the way of Jesus, the person of God revealed in Christ, or any of that kind of thing, but shifted to I believe a set of propositions, then there's this deep angst and conflict, and if fidelity to the way of Jesus means rejecting something the people that helps you encounter God in Christ for the first time think is necessary, you go, WTF? Like, I've had the experience, I'm encountering God, like I all these kind of things, but like, how is that somehow connected to what's happening? And why am I not allowed to ask the question or raise the question? Why are we repressing victims of church abuse and using our lawyers' advice to keep those patterns in practice? Like, why are we the ones who use our faith to justify being poor neighbors in a pandemic rather than the greatest stewards of those our elderly and those with health complications? Like, what's going on, right? And you don't even have to agree with all of it, but I think you could see when you look at this story how like that initial kind of criticism at modernity that starts with Protestantism levels up, right, with our understanding and control of nature through science, and then it intensifies. Right, where this critique isn't just towards the ideas, it's towards institutions and structures, and when institutions get anxious, they get protective in very toxic ways. Yep. And so I would say this moment of deconstruction is intimately it's in part connected to the larger growing distrust of are inherited institutions.
Yeah.
So the younger you are, the more likely you are to find institutional religion, politics, and economics inherently problematic in deep ways. And so the question, I think, is are these criticisms, questions, and such being raised places to call us to deeper faithfulness, things to take seriously, to reflect on, to be transformed by? Or are those questions and experiences and such things to be erased, things to be silenced, things to be cut off? The moment they are a site for theological reflection, the moment they become a mirror to reflect on the nature of us as individuals and as a community of disciples, then I think it becomes a generative moment as opposed to a threatening one.
Yeah. I think literally millions of people each year are exiting the church, and that's been going on for a long time, right? But it seems like there's enough of it going on now. It's called it's been named Age of Deconstruction, Great Deconstruction. Like, I grew up Southern Baptist. I was ordained Southern Baptist. If you look at Southern Baptists, they were a growing denomination, the largest Protestant denomination in America. They were growing up until about 10 or 15 years ago every year. I think they had over 40,000 churches with over 16 million members. I can't remember how many members, but millions and millions of members, right? And then in the last 10, 15 years, Southern Baptists, we can use them as an example. They've been on the decline, right? Declining. And then what we've seen recently is a doubling down on what I would consider bad theology. Like, okay, now we're going to push all the women out of ministry. Now we're going to double down on all of these bad theologies, and while they're crumbling, they're doubling down on bad theology. I think one of the things that this God After Deconstruction book does for people, it takes seriously the reasons people are deconstructing, the problem of evil, church abuse, Bible inconsistencies, conflicts with science, Christian nationalism, the LGBTQ plus gender issues that are out there, the multiple plurality of religions in the world, and the search for purpose and meaning. And one of the things you guys do is take those seriously, but then show how a vision for a different God, I don't know about a different, I don't know if that's the right way to word it, but you've used the term, some gods deserve to die, right? I've heard you say that. Yeah. And so what you're trying to show is that there's a different way to think about God that might help us in the process of deconstructing than reconstructing a faith that works in life, in reality, with all of these various factors. And so I love the fact that you've boiled it down to such simple language that I think people can really get it. Me as a pastor of a growing evangelical church, I would have called myself, we had women pastors, and, we were doing social justice work, and, hopefully I thought a good version of that world. I thought that grace-based, those kind of things. But I was never a Calvinist. I was an Arminianist who was always trying to hang on to sort of that orthodox theology of free will based defenses for evil and all that kind of stuff. But I still was trying to hang on to that omnipotence, right? All powerful God, an all loving God. And then in the face of evil, you basically go to some kind of mystery defense, right? And if you're hanging on to those two things, how does an all powerful God and an all loving God end up with, you name it, child sexual abuse, Holocaust, cancer in children? I mean, this pointless pain issue. And as a pastor, I held on to that tension and the mystery of that and tried to comfort people in funerals with that. I mean, I've done teen suicides. I mean, you can't imagine the hundreds of funerals I've done as a pastor for all these years. And it would help people sometimes. But then when I went through my own horrible meltdown and then literally hated myself, and it was so public, I felt so humiliated, my own theology that I'd taught for years didn't work for me. Like I couldn't hold it all together. And I was just like, well, there's no God. I mean, this was my emotional response, right? It was dark, dark, dark. It was either there's no God or F God. Like, I don't want to worship that kind of God who, and it's kind of like, for me, it was like, and then I felt shame for not being able to hang on to my faith that I'd taught for so long. So there was like this whole vortex of shame and anger and humiliation. And it was hard. It was hard. Like, and people who go through these struggles, sometimes it can be sort of an intellectual thing, and it's more, but sometimes the deep emotional pain of deconstruction, I think people sometimes miss how deep and dark these kinds of struggles can be to people. Like when their faith doesn't work anymore, and then the depths of that, oh my God. So you guys, I think you've tried to really deal with some of these honest, deep, even emotional deconstructions in really wholesome ways. Talk about a little bit why is it that that Arminian view of God, who relied on a free will defense of evil, what parts of that tend to fall apart for people when they face evil and when they face personal thing? In other words, the omnipotent part, right? How have you seen that piece? By the way, when did you let go of that thought of the God's all powerful?
Yeah, that was in undergrad. There were kind of a series of events that set it up. Maybe I'll tell this in a second, because the way I would put it is, there's one question. Freedom in some sense is required for love. So, like that, it's there, and there's a certain risk of freedom. But the other side of it is what's happening. When how does freedom relate to God's freedom and God's agency? And I think, I came to the point of seeing the free will position is not wonderfully different when it goes to challenging the character of God, from the larger Reformed tradition. Well, unless the Reformed tradition's just universalist, which that's the way of fixing that one if you're really feel a need to do it. But you think of, I've joked I wouldn't let an omnipotent God babysit. And I think there's a real reason, right? Because there's a connection between character and expectations of agency. And so if you think of a car coming while your babysitter's playing, your kids are playing and your babysitter's watching them, in some sense, Calvin's really insistent on this, that no, I mean, even what looks like accidents or resistance to divine will, not God willed it anyway. And so there's a car coming, and kids are near the street, and Calvin's like, well, God kicked Lucy over right underneath the car. And you got to recognize the holy, omnipotent will of God. God willed that, probably from the foundations of the earth. So you may not think it's good, but you need to adjust your relationship to it. And I think when it goes to the Arminian position, it's like, well, the kid ran in front of it, and then I'm going to look at the babysitter and I'm like, yeah, but I looked on my Ring video camera and you were sitting right there. They're like, well, I didn't want to intervene. It was their free will, and they ran in front of a car. And I'm like, but that's your job. Like, you had the ability to do something and you didn't. And that's why an omnipotent deity shouldn't babysit, and none of us would choose for them to.
Right.
This isn't like getting ran over and a child dying is not it was a struggle, but they learned something from it. No, they got ran over. What they learned is you suck as a babysitter. You either threw them under or you let them run in front of it. And that's not responsible. Why would you call that depiction of power Abba, right? A loving parent of all? You're just not. And so to me, that kind of specificity of that position came up in undergrad. I was I ended up in charge of a youth group at a very small Baptist church when people left and things. And the first time I had the call from the church office to go to the hospital for an emergency because the minister is out of town. I go 19-year-old Tripp with long hair and probably thick cord shorts and a chain wallet walking into a hospital. I'm the minister, probably not what they were expecting. And there's a wreck of a young couple in the church I was friends with. They were in their early 20s, older than me. And I get in and you go sent, I didn't know at this point because it was my first time, like what to do or like how you can kind of tell how serious something is based on what floor you're going to and what machines are operating when you walk in the room and all this kind of stuff. I get in there and they don't look wonderfully beat up and they're talking and stuff. And I mean, they're shooken up, but not like, they're all conscious and talking and all the body parts are there. I'm kind of exhaling and the doctor comes in behind me and I hear, you're both going to be fine. But she's passed. And at that point, I'm like, well, who's the other person, and come to find out she was pregnant and the baby died in the wreck. And she's about to give birth to her dead daughter. And everything's changing in me. And I'm going through that list of like, I don't know, it's my first time as a minister in this situation. What am I supposed to say? And I'm thinking of the theologically correct answers and they all seem morally abhorrent. So I'm trying, I'm pausing. And the mom looks at me and puts a finger up and she says, don't you say it. Don't you say it. And I'm like, what? Don't you tell me God wanted this to happen.
Yeah.
And I knew that she was right, even though in my head, I'm like, that's theologically wrong. And I was about to say something on God's behalf that Jesus would never say. And so and I grew up, my family were particular Baptist, Reformed Baptist. So like moving and kind of wrestling with that had gotten me to the thinking around freedom thing. But it was that moment of going, no, I don't even, it may be technically right theologically, but it seems completely wrong. And it was after that, at the same time where so many of my religious classmates are cheering with, Islamophobic zeal after 9/11 for war. I had a grandparent who was going through rather horrible cancer treatments and stuff. So there were like enough things going on at that point where I was like, that's just not good. And I think that there's a sense where oftentimes those questions come up because, especially for people of faith, when we think about the essence of God, we'll say something like God is love, right? And what is the essence of God? But then when reality, the arbitrariness of life, problematize the statement of love, the question of like, who is God and understanding the essence shifts from one of essence to existence, like is God. And like you mentioned earlier about like some gods needing to die, like it seems to me at least one way of inheriting the tradition of Jesus is that like gods whose character aren't even as nice as loving as Jesus deserve to die. That like the place in which we explain the question, who is God, is we begin by telling the story. So Jesus, right? His first sermon in Mark, right? Like the time is now, repent and believe in the good news for the kingdom of God is here. Or you tell a story about Mary and Joseph, we tell a story about a particular embodied person. Like this is what the word of God in sandals looks like. And it's not a ruthless moralist ready to weigh out. It's not a judge deciding your murder trial. It's a loving parent who wants, like a mother hen, to hold all of her little chicks close, or the one he teaches us to pray to Abba, and these kind of things. And so the theological questions have put me up against kind of tradition and things, but I found those intuitions, like when you start to test them with the story of Jesus, there you end up with new allies for thinking theologically. And obviously, that's also the same time I'm start doing philosophy and religion science stuff, and then I end up finding process philosophy, and so then this position ends up having a lot stronger coherence with how we understand the world. It helps engage a lot of the problems you sit in the book. But yeah, for me, that the question around divine power, evil, suffering, and such, and how the theologically appropriate answers seemed to be divorced from the character of Jesus as the Gospels testify. Like those experiences found the gospel, and kind of that was the permission structure in a sense for me to let some gods die on behalf of one revealed in Jesus.
Yeah. I've appreciated that statement of yours. If you believe in God, God should be as nice as Jesus. Your God should be as nice as. I mean, that's a paraphrase maybe, but you've said that often. It broke up for me. It was like, if God's all powerful and he doesn't stop the Holocaust, or he doesn't prevent a child from getting run over by a car in your story, or if he's teaching us through all this stuff all the time. Well, if your kid doesn't clean his room, you don't give him cancer. If a kid's, you know what I mean? Like the teaching mode, well, what can we, obviously you want to grow through all tragedies, right? But the idea that God is causing them to teach us something. And so he's inflicting these, no good, loving parent would give their kid cancer because they didn't get the room cleaned up,
Yeah. Or if they just asked for bread, would give them a stone.
There you go. you can use the Bible on me, Tripp. All right. Good stuff. So give us, in the time we have left, how do you introduce this vision of an uncontrolling, loving God, an uncontrolling, loving God. So this kind of God isn't powerful, all powerful, like we think of it sometimes, like we used to think of it, or like I used to think of it. Give us your layman's take on why is it significant that if God is at the central core of his being love, what do we mean by that love? And then what do we mean by open? What do we mean by relational? And how is it that uncontrolling love is, because once I deconstructed on that, I was almost like, well, why would I want to believe in a God who can't do anything? I had this really strong vineyard theology of a breaking in of the kingdom in sort of supernatural ways. We prayed for the sick and we did all these things. And I've seen some things that I thought looked really supernatural, in my ministry, and people healings and different things like that. And then when all that fell apart for me, I was going, well, what if there's a God who can't do any, and I love the way Tom addresses some of these things, like God can't book, and but you're like, in a layman's term, why is it so critical that God be centrally love and then at the same time uncontrolling? And that was hard for me, because it's like, felt like I was believing in a God who couldn't do anything.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of times people
separates God from the world, and God doesn't really interact with the world. He just sets it in motion and then steps away. Your vision of God is way more involved, but not in the ways that I used to think God was involved. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's there is I think a habit in most more conservative confessional kinds of monotheisms that kind of unawareingly internalized the modern vision of the world where it just works all on its own, doing its thing, right? And so for there to be anything that's trustworthy about God, it has to be an intervention, like the system in some way has to be paused, be it maybe for a conception or a resurrection or a miracle or whatever, they are, right? And so then even the notion of miracle there, how most people use it is assuming that that would be a time where what would have happened otherwise, God decided this other thing's happening, right? So that's not really the picture of the God-world relationship in the Hebrew scriptures at all. But it was the one in early modernity in response to kind of the advent of modern science that became a very powerful apologetic tool, right? Like of the ordering of creation, natural law, clockmaker image. It generates eventually a kind of deism that over time allows you just to get rid of God and pretend that laws just happen to be here, structured this way. The philosophical backside of process relational thinking is connected to a whole different vision of science, agency, and such. And then theologically, it's grounded much more in a participatory notion of God-world relationship you see in the Hebrew scriptures. So, some of that feeling of setting aside omnipotence is because not consciously, but culturally, we just picked up a vision of the world where kind of continuous creation, if you think of the classical Christian doctrines, is something that happened in the establishment of the system, not the kind of organic flow of it.
Right.
But the other part is like when you think of the imagery that Jesus latches onto the most, it's parental loving imagery. And I think most of us that have been a parent or have heard the general fear and glories of being a parent have an awareness, right? Like, yeah, you're deeply involved and invested in bringing a child into the world. And then what it looks like to be a responsible parent to each child changes based on the child, changes based on the context, changes based on their age, right? Like if I walked up to my 16-year-old today and was like, oh, well, let me help you wipe, it would be really weird. But if I had failed to do such things early on, it would have been painful.
Right.
And so I think there's, or even let's take, it's exam time now. What I do with a 7-year-old who's taking his first test is very different than what I do with my 16-year-old taking his first AP exams. And they vary, right? Like helping when you start school, starting to learn, like part of what you're doing here is learning how to learn. Like, how do you be present? What is it like to take challenges and do things? And you have to be a lot more participatory and such. But you could, as a parent, go, well, it's not going well. You know what I need to do? I need to use my parental power. And I'm going to go with them to school. I'm going to hold their hand. I'm going to force them to do their homework. I'm going to count their things. And what you end up doing is you get what you want, but you don't form the person that you're after. And so then their relationship with you is the totalitarian that forces them to get good grades, and they don't learn the joy of learning, the habits of doing it, how to take the challenges and grow. And so when they get older, you hope that they are thinking about, how do I get prepared for this? How do I plan it out? Like, what is it like to communicate to my teachers effectively? Because I used to have to sit down with the teacher and the kid when they're in elementary school and help them figure out how to do it. But now I get copied on emails and I'm like, whoa, success. But if he come like, mommy, daddy, I need you to go to school and tell my friends what to do or tell the teachers what to do. Like, you're like, no, right? So like part of successful parenting is like relating to them where they are with the challenges of them, what's unique to them. But the goal isn't to coerce and force them into getting good grades. The goal is to help cultivate a love of learning, what it's like for them to do it well and succeed and participate in a learning environment. And that involves the growth and maturation, right? Or the process to it. So an open relational theology is one that's like, Yeah, like the future's not determined, but what is determined is God's commitment to be the loving, caring one invested in each moment the most. What it looks like varies. And then what it looks like in the next moment isn't just determined by you, it's also determined by all the other people and creatures that were a part of making a decision. So when you get a really helpful teacher, what does it look like to cooperate and help a child that recently got diagnosed with a learning disability learn to learn and succeed? Different than if they're just naturally gifted and didn't have that challenge, or they had a teacher that's like, I don't believe in dyslexia, and are being obnoxious, right? It all looks different. And so like part of setting it taking seriously, I think the kind of universal loving spirit best described in peak parenting image of God is that's what God, and that's powerful.
Yeah,
like,
it is powerful.
Like you will be impacting the world based on how you parent, whether you did a good job or not, in ways way after you're gone. And now universal loving spirit, who's the parent of all, then like you take that model, and we know we succeed as parents when not when they remain our child, but when they come to participate and express in their own unique and particular way the deepest values that we hopefully communicated them in a way where they internalize it and learn to see themselves as loved, maybe their neighbor, hopefully their enemy, all these kinds of things. And so like once we realize both, I think in our scientific understanding of the world and then the biblical witness is for a much more participatory relational vision of the divine, then we won't like assume certain things about the word miracle means God shows up out of nowhere. We won't look at an event that happens and either God permitted it or willed it. But we'll see the kind of wise, parental, loving, cooperative nature as both what is testified to, but also like it coheres, I think, better with our actual experience.
I love that. I love the loving parent. I think that's where we have to anchor ourselves, and you've done such a great service, I think, to this. Well, Tripp, we're out of time, and I told you I'd have you outdone, but man, I could talk for hours about this. But let's do a real quick plug for Theology Beer Camp. I was a latecomer last year as one of the God Pods, but I was there. I loved it. It was a great experience. Give people just a quick advertisement plug for Theology Beer Camp in Denver this year, which is a short drive from Kansas City.
Yeah. Well, it's the 3 days. It's kind of like somewhere between theology nerdiness mixed with a youth camp for adults. There's all sorts of
zaniness.
It's hard to describe. It's lots of fun. There'll be tons of cool speakers and other podcasters and such. I mean, my favorite part of it is putting on something that amounts like a giant party where people that are connected digitally end up getting to know they're not alone, find new friends, new podcasts to listen to, kind of bringing together lots of the people that, come don't have faith communities where they live that they, feel safe being a part of or have connected to. And so, yeah, there's like nerdy things and fun things and music and all sorts of stuff. But it's also a time where, you have a high confidence that if it looks interesting to you, there'll be hundreds of other people that it looks interesting to there, where you don't have to apologize for the questions and things that you're bringing.
Yeah, it was a blast. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I'm going to continue to plug it. I'm going to send this out to my email list. Really encourage people to join us out there this year.
Yeah, you should use your code. Then they can get
exactly
a discount code.
I got a code. It's like Gandalf something or other.
Ooh,
it's a good code. All right. So thank you, Tripp, for being on Spirituality Adventures. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We appreciate it. Check out Homebrewed Christianity if you haven't done it already, and God After Deconstruction, and join us at Theology Beer Camp. See you next time. Take care. Hey, you made it to the end. Thanks for listening all the way through on this episode. By the way, if you're not already a supporter, go to spiritualityadventures.com, sign up for one of our monthly supports, and you will receive our bonus content. You'll receive lots of interesting information about our guests. Many of our musicians will do special bonus songs and record a song. So I want to encourage you to do that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Be sure and subscribe. Be sure and share any of the episodes that you like. And be sure and make comments if you like them as well. This helps us get Spirituality Adventures out there to more listeners, more watchers. So whatever platform you're using, subscribe, like, share, make comments, and go to our website, sign up for our team, and be a part of the team support. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.